Hello and welcome to a new season of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
I am Mike.
I'm Trevor.
I'm Ori.
And I'm Josh. After taking a season off, it's great to have you back, Trevor.
It's good to be back.
Already. And Ari, it's always great to have you on board.
Thank you, Josh.
And for the very first time, we have a very special guest, a very admirable booktuber. You may have not seen him for quite some time, but you could still find his footage up on his channel. Right now, he's under his name, Mike Frost. The anchor of that channel is Mike Frost. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you on board.
Great to be with Gladiators.
Today, we are going to be discussing a poem that Trevor selected. We are particularly going to be concentrating on stanzas 30 and 31 of this poem because it is book length in its size. But the poem is The People Yes by Carl Sandburg. Trevor, you have a discussion starter?
I've noticed that reading through The People Yes, listening to a bit of old-time radio shows about him, that Carl Sandburg is pretty much a man of the people. This book was right up his street when he created it. It was not the first time he had worked with the people on creating verse, but it was one of the ones that he liked the most. I think my discussion starter would be, what would you say about the people? Not the people, yes, but the people, the general public, the man in the street, the average Joe Spud. Basically conceived from these particular stanzas is Carl Sandburg's own perception of the people. These particular stanzas are what Sandburg had termed in one of his readings as a mosaic of proverbs. Case in point, a quotation here from Abraham Lincoln. You can fool all of the people part of the time and part of the people all the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I noticed there were a lot of cliches in this poem. It was cliche after cliche. When you incorporate that too much, I feel that it's sometimes a challenge to grasp. Have you ever heard of the country song by Lynn Anderson called Rose Garden?
I don't believe so. I'll have to check it out sometime.
The way that this song is structured, she makes reference to a lot of consecutive cliches, or they're very much interweaved with one another. I was able to get something out of it, and is that it was Sandburg's general commentary on society and how just because you are born with wealth and prosperity doesn't mean it results in a great finished product. Well, on the contrary, someone can be born without the wealth and prosperity, like Iphicrates, as mentioned in stanza 31, and he developed a great deal of acclaim as a major general. Major not as in the title, but major as in an important general in ancient Greece, in Athens.
Definitely have to look up this particular general at some point. Might have shown up in the history as of...
That was the one thing that did stick out, the Harmodius and Iphicrates' interactions with one another, as per stanza 31, where they said, your low birth puts you beneath me, said Harmodius. Iphicrates replying, the difference between us is this. My family begins with me. Yours ends with you, which seemed pretty snarky.
Sandburg commented on that one, saying that it was terribly American.
Well, yeah, I would follow up with you, and what Trevor's saying is a mosaic of this. This is really, it is terribly American. This is the American idea from the European endings. World ends the European idea and begins this new American start. And I found it fascinating you guys started with 30 and 31, because to me, this is the turning point of this, the entire narrative. Started in stanzas 30 and 31, because before this point, it's all really Carl Sandburg in his normal poetry, like he's written through most of his earlier books. And here, this is the mosaic. He's not trying to write this, as you're saying. He's basically copying the people. They are cliches to us now. They were probably clichéic in his day as well. This is where he breaks from his voice and starts to read these two poems especially, and then from this point onward, it's a lot of you're hearing different voices each line. It can't be, this is not Carl Sandburg's voice through a poem. This is other people's voices that you're hearing one line at a time. To hear this poem, because I'm a very audio person, so to hear this poem, you have to really hear a completely different person speaking each line. That's where the mosaic comes in. And part of that beginning of this, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of the poem, and first two parts of the poem. First one where Carl Sandburg references the Tower of Babel, where he says all the people were in the same, and then God scattered the languages. So he scattered the people. And then in stanza 2, he talks about Illinois and Indiana, where people are all coming together. This is the melting pot, bringing all those voices back together into one spot where you can hear the voices of the world, all those disparate voices now coming back together. So the end, as you're saying, with harmonious and faculties, is the end of that era, the beginning of this new time frame.
Mm-hmm.
But all these voices are now regathered from all the continents and the seven seas, as it mentions in stanza 2, I think, where he brings them all back together. So this is the new plane where, and it's Tower of Babel is often used by Sandburg, skyscrapers that are built in Chicago, New York City, skyscrapers. So the renewing of the Tower of Babel. This is the bringing back together voices. So like you, I hear these, they're more cliches now than they were more like cliche at that time. They've been heard. These are sayings and stuff that were widespread throughout the West. But they're really individual voices. This is not Carl Sandburg's voice. This is the voice of people. He's mimicking these voices, putting these voices down on paper.
And I would say that is historically speaking, as far as Harmodius and Iphicratus, that was a relative turning point within ancient Greek history too. I think that someone that is an enthusiast for ancient Greek history would really pick up on that message. For someone like myself, I had to incorporate some background research in order to get those references. The copy of the People, Yes, that I have didn't have them. There are some, I know Penguin Classics is known for incorporating references to things that are referred to within text, or Norton Anthology too.
The thing with poetry is I always find it open-ended, and this is a poem that I felt was so open-ended that I don't know if there is one correct way of figuring out what's going on, but from what I read from it, it just sounded like, you're basically, if you were to take the entire poem and put it into one word, it would be perspective. That's the word I would use to describe this particular couple of stanzas, because what I'm seeing, and I don't know if you guys are seeing the same thing, because I struggled to read this, so I might not have a 100% grasp on it, but it definitely seemed like what this was is like everyone has a different perspective. Everyone is going to have a different perspective because of the way they've been raised or born. I can't tell if Sandburg's saying that's a good or a bad thing. Maybe he's just saying that's what it is, and that's the world we live in, and that's what we got to accept. And if that is true, what puzzles me now is not necessarily what's in the poem, but what's outside of the poem, as in, like, why is everyone in the world right now so, like, they don't want to accept that other things can happen, or that things are possible, that there are different perspectives. So I mean, like, this poem, I think, if that is what is trying to be brought across, I think in a simpler method should definitely be taught to people around the world.
I get that sense that Carl Sandburg seems to be approaching, or the way that this poem is being approached is that it just is. It's a commentary of what people are, what the world is, as opposed to what the opinion is about that. Even though I think by this point, as Mike made mention to, it is such a turning point where it starts out with him speaking, then it turns into the whole idea that it's the people speaking for themselves.
And Josh, I also wanted to say that like, this is like part one. This is like part one of what we need a follow up to this. This is an incomplete poem, because what's happening here is you have someone, a very good poet, saying, okay, there are different perspectives in the world. It is a little cliched, that phrase is saying everyone has their own perspective, but like it's what's true. Now you need a part two. You need a part two saying, okay, everyone should accept that people have different perspectives.
Part
You need
two,
a poem like that.
are you referring, because this is 107 stanzas total.
I'm talking about these two particular stanzas.
I think that this is, well, it's the turning point. I wouldn't say that it would be, this was my introduction to Carl Sandburg, which it was. I'd want to read more, and I'd be looking for, to be quite honest, a little bit better.
Oh, when I meant part two, I wasn't talking about Sandburg. I was talking about a modern day poet who, I don't even know. I'm just saying some kind of modern day poet writing a poem that is in response to these two stanzas. Like these two stanzas are saying, okay, everyone has a different perspective, but now in 2021, you need a poem that basically says, why haven't people accepted this yet? How long ago, Trevor, was this poem written?
Sometime in the early 20th century.
So it's been 100 years.
1936.
15
Yeah,
years
I
from
would
now,
probably-
we might have to make a follow-up poem called "The People Again."
I would think, because I always see Sandburg as kind of in the tradition of this style of poetry. Because I agree with Ari that this is unfinished. He's leaving it as this is the way it is, continuation. I always see him as a bridge between Whitman and Ginsberg. Ginsberg, in a sense, answering the question, what is the answer to the people? Yes. I agree with you, Josh. This is probably not Carl Sandburg at his best. He's got some of his better lines in earlier poems, 30, and then in Lincoln, midway through this work, is good. But I much prefer his earlier works, Sandburg's earlier.
I would like to read the Lincoln biography, or I think they were biographies.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's several volumes of that. I've gotten them on several occasions, but never read them all the way through.
I was watching What's My Line when Carl Sandburg was the mystery guest. That was such a thrill to watch. He had a good sense of humor, but he was very modest at the same time. In a way, you could say that he's a bridge between Whitman and Ginsberg, but I always feel that his tone is a bit, I always got that reflection that his presentation was like a Robert Frost kind of figure. Maybe not execution, but personality-wise.
Yeah, I think because they're both of the people, Frost and Sandburg, more so than, I hate to say than Whitman, but certainly more than Ginsberg. Ginsberg's of a certain beat generation, maybe not of all of America. I don't think Ginsberg kind of represents all of the American people like Frost or Sandburg, or even so Whitman.
These particular two stanzas clearly talking about, how everyone has their own perspective and everyone is like their own person, and that people can do things. Some people will just want to do things and some people just won't. And it's just, that's what it is. Everyone has a slightly different perspective on life. However, if this poem was done in 1926, like Trevor said, I would argue to say that everything that was written in this poem has gotten worse. Like the way people have treated these perspectives have gotten worse over the next 100 years. So my question is, how do we get it back on track? How do we get back to what Carl Sandburg's roots were in these two stanzas? What do we have to do?
I think that's more of a general life question. And as far as that's concerned, in order to get things back on track, you as an individual have to believe in the fact that you can get it back on track.
Don't let the naysayers get you down. Right, Trevor?
Right.
It's like when it comes to littering. The way that you start cutting out littering is you throw your items in the trash.
Right.
Just because other people are not going to do so, or maybe hesitant to do so, doesn't mean that you should do so.
In essence, Josh, that kind of was a bit of a rhetorical question to get to my next part, which was going to be, I think it would be good to have another poem or stanzas, a couple of stanzas similar to this one to help, and maybe have people maybe put these in schools even. I mean, obviously it would have to be like high school or college, because this is pretty complicated stuff, but stuff like this to be put into like school curriculums and college curriculums. The words are complicated, but the message is straightforward. A lot of poetry is like that. And I think I'm going to disagree with both you and Mike on this one. I think Carl Sandburg got the message that he wanted to get across very well, actually.
I think there were moments where he did get the message across. It was just the way that it was written.
Yeah, he
I
might.
think
Yeah, I
did.
will agree. He used some complicated words, but if you like get down into it,
I think when you incorporate things that are clichéic, often they will stand for different things, and they will paint different pictures. You're thinking about one thing one moment, and then you're thinking about something else the next.
And I think that he got his message across as a whole, as an artist. In his, I would call it social democratic message that he, if you take his works as a whole, not this particular work kind of holds as this is the way it is. I think if you look at his work as a whole, I would agree with you, Ari. He did get his message across, more of a social democratic leaning message, taking the work as a whole. When you talk about these particular stanzas, and even the people, yes, I think is more of a reflective, not trying to get to a answer. Now,
yeah, it's reflective.
Earlier
I
poems.
can agree with that.
yeah, especially these two stanzas is more reflective than it is.
It's like he's giving you the information, and you choose what to do with it.
And there are curriculums of this. We have Howard Zinn's The History of the People, probably be a college curriculum that would cover the Sandburg type idea, because he dealt with mainly the working class. It's not total criticism of all the problems America had. He was very interested in the working class problem. Take a look at Howard Zinn's History of the People in the United States from the people's perspective. I think that's a college course that covers this sort of idea.
It's basically a question of form versus content in the delivery of it. I guess other poems or works of Sandburg could also talk on this particular point. I mean, some of the Chicago poems.
I have a collection of I have the Chicago Poems collection from Dover Publications. What was it with these particular stanzas that stuck out to you, Trevor?
It was almost as if he was going around with a dictaphone, or at least a notebook, and getting to understand the people by asking them about their perspectives and picking up on some of the things he had heard about the world, the nation, or the people. And a case in point, toward the end of section 31, you have, he always takes off his own hat when he mentions his name. What's the matter with him? The big I, always the big I. The ambiguous part about that one is you're not quite sure whether the individual in question is an egomaniac or overly modest.
It's kind of like an opinion column for you, Trevor.
Yeah, modesty is the opposite of egotistical. Was there a particular line that stuck out to anybody that really defined these sections or stuck with you?
For me, it's hard to pick just one. I think like the old general two stanzas was very, like they all, like you said, Josh, they were all pretty much, they were obviously different words, different experiences, but each line came out about the same, trying to describe the same thing. I thought the line about the one that was easiest for me to understand was probably the one where it's like, a tall man can't be a fireman or something when they're on the train, because the short man can shovel in coal much easier. But I mean, the tall man could still do it. Like that's kind of the simplest I thought the poem got to.
But if the tall feller's got long arms, he can do wonders.
Yeah.
And for me, I think the quintessential lines here are you guilty or not guilty? What else do you have? That line there.
Well, Trevor, you should mention about the line that was supposed to be there, or
Yes.
that Sandburg had initially had, because I know you sent it to me.
When he read that part out loud for an audience, he said, "Are you guilty or not guilty? What else have you, Judge? Are you guilty or not guilty? I waives the hearing." What do you mean, you waives the hearing? I don't want to hear any more about it.
Oh, that's a quintessential Trevor line. I wonder if they knew that you would take it and blow it out of proportion 50 some odd years later.
Probably just a coincidence.
But is it true, Trevor, that line was actually replaced, or were you just making it up?
The line as printed was the original form. He just threw it as that kind of line with the punchline in it as for a live audience, because he knew it would probably be a way to end it on a laugh.
He was a great improviser.
So, Mike, what was it that stuck out to you with regard to the "Are you guilty or not guilty," and what else have you?
I think that's what Sandburg's is really saying to this whole thing. He's criticizing and he's advocating for both sides of the fence on a lot of these issues. So I think that for these two stanzas, that's the quintessential line, feeds into the rest of the poem going forward, 32, 33, and onward, is this idea that guilt or innocence, black or white, is not what he's trying to get at. It's that it can be both. Is there another choice between black and white? Is there another choice between guilt and innocence? Is there another choice? And if we present enough evidence, enough cliches, enough lines from the people, if you hear enough diverse voices from the people, you'll realize that there's more than one correct answer, more than one way to look at any particular guilt or innocence charge. Looking at that, I think that's what that idea carries over from this point pretty onward. Most of the earlier poems are more his voice. From that point on, it's let's look at all the different sides.
You mean Sandburg in general, or Sandburg?
Yeah, Sandburg in this particular, in the people, yes.
Okay.
Sandburg from that line on, to me, is presenting both sides. And he's allowing that to come out so that we don't, what's the other choice besides everybody over here is wrong, everybody over here is right. I think he's matured by the point here. Most of his earlier works, he's more definitive in what is right and wrong. From this point onward, I think he's less definitive on, these people, because they're these people, are right.
Yeah, I think he also touches upon that that train of thought where when he talks about you can fool all of the people part of the time and part of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time, and then finishes that with, it takes all kinds of people to make a world. That's an underlying theme as far as this whole poem is concerned, that you need right and wrong in order to keep a world going. The one that sticks out to me is the one right before that one, which is, to work hard, to live hard, to die hard, and then go to hell after all would be too damn hard.
Yeah, I like that line.
It just almost feels like we put all of this effort in. It's just so naturalistic in its nature. No repetition intent, but to do it for nothing. And if that's the way the world turns, then what's the point? Do we have any final thoughts? Anything we didn't bring up?
I appreciated the message the poem had. I just wish that it was more complete. I wish that you could give I don't know if he does this, but in further stanzas, I wish he could give tips as to how to do this properly.
The story is still being written to this day.
Tips as to how to make the world a better place, or how to do things, how to
mostly, or how to tips as to how to accept perspectives that are different than yours.
Though I don't think that's what this poem is really about. I mean, it may get to that point, but
No. I know this poem's not what it's about. I'm saying I would have liked to have been if he were to do more stanzas following this one. But I think the whole thing was more just about what it is, So it's a good first step, recognizing what the issue is. Is it always what do they say in Alcoholics Anonymous? Admission is the first step to recovery. Well, this is the admission of what is going on. We know from this poem, everyone has a different perspective on this. Then that puts it in your mind. It puts the seed in your mind, and you're like, what's in your own perspective? What's the next thing that we can do to make the world a better place, like you said, Josh?
Well, I would just say, if anybody's going to start with Carl Sandburg, I would start with Chicago. If you start with the people, start at the beginning, you'll hear Carl Sandburg. And then when you get to this part, you'll understand that it's not really his voice he's trying to get across, it's his voices that he hears, and that each line is its own voice. Because if you start with 30 and 31, the misreading of what Sandburg sounds like as a poet.
Yeah, I don't think it would be a good way. If sometimes in English books or reading books, they'll give you a sample of a longer work, and if we did it this way, it wouldn't work.
Imagine this being on a standardized test, Josh. They always have those long bits of poetry. You have to figure out what certain words mean. This one would have been impossible.
Yeah, I needed to do research on the Greek figures myself. Yeah, I think that would be, as far as that's concerned. I think that the Chicago poems would be where I'd want to start with, or I'd want to continue with Sandburg, because it seems like that's probably what he's known most for as far as his poetry is concerned, or where it's kind of like saying, with Robert Frost. The first thing that comes to mind is The Road Not Taken. Aside from Chicago poems, as far as his non-poetry is concerned, the Abraham Lincoln biographies would be the first thing to come to mind with Sandburg.
Yeah, for me, it's the American Songbag, but I'm not a biographer. A lot of people love biographies.
I love
American Songbags.
I love biographies and autobiographies.
Yeah. I especially, I'm an enthusiast for American presidential history, so that would be the Lincoln biographies would be right up my alley.
I know Trevor and I love musician biographies.
And for me, the first non-poetic work of Sandburg that would stick out for me is his children's work, the Rutabaga Stories, which I had read some years ago, and to this day, I still have not deciphered the meaning behind the cryptic phrase, "Only the fireborn understand blue."
In other words, you haven't a Scooby.
Exactly, and exactly, and in that order.
Okay. If anybody's interested in picking up The People, yes, it is a book-length poem, and here is my copy. And I want to thank everybody for tuning into our discussion, and be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. And Trevor, I want to wish you the best on your move.
Thank you, and I will do my best to check in with the Literary Gladiators as often as I can.
Already, that is
And Josh,
excellent. Yes.
support Literary Gladiators on Patreon.
Oh, okay. Oh, him again.
Well, hey, he's helping us get some support. So yeah, definitely support our channel on Patreon if you like the stuff that you're listening to, and we've got a whole new season here. So
already, and I appreciate his message. For now, and as always, we encourage you to keep reading.
Keep reading.
Thank you.